Mark Holman, welcome to the show.
Yeah, awesome to be here, man.
How's the shoulder recovery?
Yeah, it's actually going really good. Um, Back to training, still kind of light. I haven't really got back to. I'm probably at like 30-40% in terms of weights, in terms of push movements, but legs, pulling movements, pretty close to being back to 100%.
Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. So you were still lifting pretty hard at the Amsterdam event on the lower body though. Like you haven't stopped training at any
Yeah,
point.
to be fair, that was the first time that I actually had trained. So I took maybe 3 months off because the injury happened, and then I didn't really know what was going on, and then I found out that I needed surgery, and then I got surgery, and then I didn't want to do. I didn't want to. I still had the capability in my legs, but I didn't want to like push too hard because I just didn't know. It was my first surgery. But yeah, I'm headed out of that. I feel pretty good. I'm back to playing soccer, football. I call it football, but back to
You're
playing
right.
that.
It is football.
It is football, 100%. So back to doing that, man. It's. I'd say I'm probably like 90%.
Cool. So go for anyone that doesn't know you. You've delved really, really hard into functional nutrition, but in particular, men's testosterone as your sort of niche or demographic. And I often feel when someone really dives hard into the functional nutrition route, there's always a story behind this, right? There's always something in their past. And I get a feeling from reading your work that this is the same for you. So tell me about your own battles with mental and physical health and how it led you to where you are today.
Yeah, of course. So to start, I will start, let's call it 2016. 2015, 2016. This is when I was still in college and university. I was getting a degree in environmental engineering, and I ended up getting a job in same similar field, but I was doing chemical engineering work, air pollution stuff. I got into environmental and sustainability to like help the planet and like climate change and all that stuff. I was super into that. And then what I was actually doing was working for industry, working for oil refineries, chemical plants, helping them pollute and fall within the regulations. So it was like a complete conflict in my values. So that's like the stage. That's what I'm doing day to day. And then going on top of that, the mental side of things, just feeling, I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment, so I was super lonely, which is a massive thing for men these days. Didn't have a community. Everyone that I knew in Baton Rouge, which is where LSU was, had moved. They had graduated, gone elsewhere, yet I was still there. Lack of connection because the group that I was working with, we were very siloed. We had offices, which, coming out of college, you get an office, you're like, that's awesome. But I was literally, there would be days where I would not have a conversation with anyone. And I go back to my 1-bedroom apartment, and it just was a dark time. And so a lot of it was the mental side, but looking back, I didn't really know at the time, but literally every symptom that you can think of about low testosterone, I was exhibiting that. So like no libido, no drive and motivation, just like going through the motions, not really being able to put on too much muscle. I was training pretty hard. I was possibly overtraining because I was constantly getting hurt. I was trying to go heavy and just not getting the results that I wanted. So I eventually hired my own coach, and that blew my mind open in the sense of like the results that I got, but also the entrepreneurial path. My background was like my dad's an engineer, my grandfather's an engineer, my brother's an engineer, 9 to 5, go to school, get a good job, 401k, that path. So I wasn't really exposed to this other path. So working with that guy, with my mentor, who's still my mentor, really just transformed my life from a health perspective, a fitness perspective, and then just also what I was doing with my life. So eventually, fast forward to 2018, I quit my job. I traveled through Europe, and then I came back and really just started on the path. I got a personal training certification. I was working at gyms. I was working at restaurants. And then everything shuts down in 2020. So I was faced with a choice. Do I sit around, collect unemployment, or do I really just like take a chance and go all in on myself? The dream that I've always wanted since I quit my job in 2018, I was presented with that chance. And so I went all in, signed up for a different mentorship, that taught me how to create a fitness business, and that was in April 2020. And ever since then, it's grown, and we're sitting here now in
Mm.
2024. So 4.5 years full time. It's been a hell of a ride.
There's a few interesting things you brought up there, and I think the first thing was talking about that feeling very, very lonely, and you said that's something that is very common with men these days. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it's a bunch of things, but I think it's one of the main things is just how we have been raised, how we've been taught. A lot of our fathers were kind of in that generation where we don't talk about our feelings, we don't talk about our emotions, we just get the job done, and no matter what the cost, put food on the table, and that's pretty much it. So I think we've kind of been conditioned from our fathers to behave that way. And I think it's a really, like, we're kind of in that inflection point that millennials and the younger generation are starting to become fathers and parents. And I think there's a really cool opportunity for us to take the positives of what we learned from them, but then also incorporate a little bit more modernity in the terms of being grounded, but also emotionally intelligent men.
Hmm. I think one of the things I've learned almost in the last sort of 6 months is how much environment really makes like an impact on how lonely you are. And that sounds like, well, yeah, duh, obvious if you're surrounded by people. But I spent the last 4 years living in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong's such a sociable place. Not everyone's friendly there, but it's a little bit like going to university. It's so easy to make friends at uni because you don't really need that much connection to make a friend. Hey, I'm in this new place. I've never been here before. I'm in this new place too. Do you want to be friends?
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with like living in Asia. I'm a British expat in Hong Kong. You're a British expat in Hong Kong. You already had a connection. I don't have to like the same things. I don't have to like football or rugby or sport or drama or whatever your interests are. And I found that coming back to UK very quickly, and I'm very open to say this is probably the loneliest stint I've had in my life, moving back to the UK, my marriage falling apart, moving on the business online, so I don't have any colleagues, how quickly it can go from one extreme to the next, and how the UK, as much as I love it, it's very hard to break into groups of friends here. Everyone's quite insular. Whereas if you went to Hong Kong, it's so easy just to run into people and make new friends. Like, you said you travel around Europe. Did you notice differences place to place with how sociable people were?
I was traveling alone, but I was still kind of keeping to myself. So I didn't really put myself into too many positions of, like, going out doing like pub crawls and stuff like that. I was just like doing my own thing. So I didn't really make it to the UK, which is, I flew into the UK but didn't spend too much time there. I did like Spain, France, and Italy mostly. So yeah, I don't think I can really comment effectively on that.
It's like going into the mental health thing. Obviously, I assume, when you hear the word engineer, you assume relatively, even at entry level, relatively well-paid job. You probably had a decent amount of security.
Yeah.
And it almost seemed like a lot of the mental health struggles were there when you had a lot of things that people would associate with a good mental health. Yet you mentioned when you switched over into doing coaching, you mentioned working for restaurants. I'm assuming that means you were doing 2 jobs. And then the pandemic, you took a huge scary leap. And I know what that's like in multiple occasions in my life. The way you spoke about it seemed much, much, much more positive. So looking at that, and obviously you dealing with a lot of men that may have mental health struggles, we know that suicide is the biggest killer of men our age. Like, have we got the reasons why men struggle wrong? Because you seemed happier in what would be classed as a harder time on the face of it.
Yeah, that's a really good observation. Again, it kind of comes back to, what we're told makes us happy, and then what actually makes us happy. I think for a lot of men, like, to me, purpose is such a big factor in my life. And whenever I was off that, because I hadn't ever connected to a purpose as that engineer. I was just doing it because, like, that's, I guess, what people in my family do. Like, we're a family of engineers. That's just, I guess that's who I am, despite knowing that I didn't really want to do that. So just like following the path. So it was almost like I was living someone else's life. And therefore, within that, there's a lot of unalignment that's going to create tension. within me, because I knew deep down, you can talk about, your soul and then your mind. My mind was telling me this is the right thing, but my soul deep down was like, no, this isn't it. Something's off. And I remember having so many conversations with my parents, asking them about this. It's just like, okay, yeah, I'm like entry level, so I'm kind of in the eating shit phase. I'm not doing exactly what I want. And they kept telling me, yeah, just like, get through it. It eventually gets better. You'll have a little bit more flexibility. You'll be able to get the work that you want because you've proven yourself. And I did that for a while. So I graduated in 2015 and then I quit in 2018. So a few years just like grinding and hating a lot of it, with the promise in the back of my mind that it would get better. But then I had that mentor and he completely shifted my perspective, because it allowed me to truly go inward and understand who I was and what I really wanted to do. Because a lot of the time I was working, but I was also just like on Google, what's the best exercise for this? So spending so much energy and time into like trying to find the optimal training program, switching it every week and just not getting results. So like hiring someone else took all of that off of my like energetic plate. So I had so much more bandwidth to go inward and like reflect and really understand who I was. And from doing that, I started asking questions. I started asking these questions like, who am I? What do I want? What is my purpose? And that is what led me down that road. So I think purpose, especially for men, is really massive. And it doesn't need to be like you have to start this business and change the world. It can be as simple as like, be the best man that you can every single day. But you need to connect to that. A lot of people just don't, and they're just like going through the motions. They're clocking in, they're getting a salary, they're hating it. There's no intention behind it. And I think that is what causes that tension with men's mental health. And then also that was more the like mental side of things. Physically, I think this is a massive thing that doesn't get talked about enough, and it's the testosterone piece. So one of the symptoms of low testosterone is depression and anxiety. So someone with those symptoms will go into the doctor, and what do you think happens? Here's an SSRI, go to therapy. But in reality, they don't test for their hormones. They don't really do a comprehensive blood panel to really see, because like health is the foundation to all of that. If you're unhealthy, you're going to have a lot more instances of depression and anxiety. So I think if we were able to like include that in the screening for these conditions, we'd have a lot better success rate with men getting better. We talk about the suicide rate being super high. I think a lot of men can actually be saved if we look at this and then they get the right support, not just like TRT, but the right support to holistically, naturally optimize their hormones, so then their mental health gets better. I think that's a massive piece that the general conventional medicine system is just missing.
I couldn't agree with you more. If you ever listen to Modern Wisdom, the podcast with Chris Williamson, he talked about when he was a club promoter that he thought he was depressed for years, and he realized he was just massively sleep deprived. And obviously that has an impact on the testosterone component. That's maybe a little bit of an easier fix, but it shows how we can make a big assumption that we have this problem where there are fixes that potentially could be free within our control. And I also think like, I used to be very critical on doctors in the sense of they should tell you more about nutrition and lifestyle advice. And well, yes, they should. But I've spent years working with coaches where their biggest struggle is client adherence. And they speak to their clients every 2-3 days a week, if not every single day. And they can't get them to adhere. When men go to the doctors when the lump's already grown, the arm's already fallen off, their pancreas has exploded. So what chance have they got? But I do think as a fitness industry, and maybe this is up to us to raise the standard of the industry where people would even consider this, being able to have a referral network. So for sake of if a doctor sees someone with depression and they do run said tests, and maybe they don't have the impact to get the lifestyle change that are necessary, there should be someone like you in their network that they can refer to go and seeing after this. But like, you mentioned some of the symptoms, depression, you mentioned loss in libido, you mentioned energy. But there's a lot of things that potentially could cause that, not necessarily testosterone. If you hear the phrase, if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. What made you not think, I don't like my job, I'm stressed, Maybe I was like, I wasn't sleeping as well because I was in that graph phase of working hard. What made you start to think there might be more to this?
Yeah, I think it's so for me personally, the realization didn't really come till after, till I started to really dive into it. But just from working with a bunch of different people and like seeing blood work and talking with people, like I'm constantly in direct messages on Instagram with people who have testosterone levels like below 400. It's different units, and that would probably be like below 13 or 12 nanomoles per liter for y'all. So just seeing it so consistently, it made me think like, yeah, like this is a massive problem. And then the bigger stats of like decrease of testosterone levels 1% every single year. The crazy one is like a 22-year-old today has the same testosterone levels as a 67-year-old in the year 2000. So like,
what's causing that?
Yeah, so tons of different things. So obviously the first one is obesity and overweight. In America, 74% of adults are overweight or obese, which is just mind-blowing stat to me, like 74%, 3/4 of everyone, of adults. Crazy. And it's probably trended that way in the UK as well. So that is a massive thing. So if you think like, why does that, just being unhealthy overall, but more specifically with obesity and overweight, you have with more fat tissue on your body, there's something called aromatase that is upregulated, and that is essentially transforming testosterone into estrogen. So it's kind of stealing the testosterone and creating it into estrogen, which just, you don't necessarily want that. That's a major thing. I think the general unhealthiness outside of being overweight, so lack of movement, so like sedentary lifestyle is massive. That's been characterized close to being as dangerous as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. Chemicals, which are in like cleaning products, endocrine disruptors, phthalates, all these chemicals, I call them like the convenience chemicals. So things that we use out of convenience because they work pretty well. So like if you're using it, generally like the natural cleaners aren't as effective. So we use these like chemicals that are derived specifically for this one thing to like clean grease off of a pan or whatever. But in reality, like we don't look at the long-term effects of that. We just look at I want this problem solved right now in a very convenient way. And so we go for that. We're humans. Like it makes sense, but we're getting to a point where there's so much of that it's getting into our bloodstream. Like a major thing is microplastics as well. There was a study that was done. I think it was on dogs, but a few dogs. And then I think it was also on human cadavers. They found microplastics in the testicles in every single one of them. I think it was maybe 50 human cadavers.
Yeah.
And that's also being found across the blood-brain barrier. So all these things are just everywhere, and the like trend is convenience. And so if you go back to that 67-year-old, he didn't have all of these convenient things, all these chemicals, all these EDs, phthalates. They weren't really around yet. Plastic wasn't in use as much. Seed oils as well, massively. But as we've gone into the future, we're using more and more and more. And so I think there's a direct correlation with that, 100%.
Yeah, I think convenience is one of the big things, right? Like, if you go on, even in the fitness industry, if you go online now, you'll see about 300 coaches giving you some funky recipe of how to make a cheesecake, high protein, low carb, right?
Yeah.
And I would say they're not convenient. It's so much easier to put a steak on a grill than it is to actually make this recipe. But I've even seen things now where, if like, you wouldn't see ice baths or flotation tanks become really popular 20 years ago. People are so comfortable that they're seeking discomfort artificially. I can order food, I can get it to my house. There's even buttons to turn off the light from your phone. You don't even have to get up and go to the light switch anymore, which I think is crazy. But, and then this is the thing now, like, because food has become so convenient, we can get more calories in the size of a postage stamp like now than 50 years ago. People are looking for taste variety where you didn't need this 50 years ago. A level of boredom in food was relatively good because it made it harder to overeat if you had to cook your own food, and it was things that didn't have this taste sensation all the time. But I want to come back to a couple of things you mentioned there, and particularly toxins and seed oils, because you'll see for every person that talks about these things, and rightly so, in my opinion, because I think we think very similarly about these things. You'll get another person that says, "I have this randomized control trial that say toxins aren't to be feared," and they'll say, "But Mark, you had a dog study and you had human cadaver studies. You hadn't got live populations." What would you say to that? Should we fear toxins? And what are people who are doing these studies and publicizing them missing?
Yeah, you're getting the good questions.
Thank you.
So first off, I don't think we should fear anything. I don't think that's the right word or emotion to feel, because our thoughts create our reality. So if we're fearful of something, if we think it's going to harm us, there's more likelihood that it's going to harm us. This manifestation, attracting, I always say worrying is praying for what you don't want. So the same, if you're fearful of these chemicals harming you, then they might actually be doing that.
And then without cutting you off, I think that's a huge point when it comes to the toxin thing, because like if you make an argument that toxins don't cause any harm, I think you need to do some more research. We can absolutely prove this. But on the flip side of this, right, it's almost impossible in today's world to remove everything, right? So if changing all your face creams, all your detergents, all your products, never having a can of anything again, never having any plastics ever again, we get to this point where the impact on the nervous system from being so stressed about changing life outweighs the harm that these chemicals are doing. So it's like, how much is it really important? Where do we tread? What's the easiest wins we can get? Sorry, I cut you off there, but it was just on that point of stress being a big factor in here.
No, I really like that point, because there's not many people know this word. It's called orthorexia, and it's essentially a disorder where you're just like so health conscious that it creates this stress and it actually makes things worse. So, and I'm very maybe flexible with this. So like even alcohol, which we know is like a massive toxin, it's essentially poison, but we have to look at the broader scale. If like, and I might get some shit for this, but I'm saying, look from this perspective of like the stress management and like connection with friends and just like the holistic aspect of health. One person with a very myopic view is like, no, you can't drink any alcohol. Don't have a beer with your friends. Like, do not do that. Stay home. When in reality, that actually might harm them because they're lacking community. They're lacking connection. Their friends are going out for a beer. And if they're not drinking, they're not going to go. So they're going to miss out on a massive piece of health, which maybe they stay lonely. They feel that lack of connection, which makes them less happy. It's a downward spiral. So looking at it from that perspective, like weighing the risks and rewards, maybe going to the bar with the friends and having a pint or two is actually a net positive compared to the alternative that you would have done if you were so worried about being optimal and, doing the right thing. So I feel like I've got a unique perspective on that, because that's how I live my life too. Like I understand the drawbacks of drinking alcohol. Like I'm not tone deaf to that, but I look at it from a holistic perspective. And that even like in a coaching client interaction, a lot of health coaches, and I was talking about this on my story the other day, a lot of health coaches, someone will come to them and they're like, I'm not feeling focused. I feel kind of ADD. And they'll be like, oh, okay. And they ask what supplement, and they're like, yeah, alpha GPC, ginkgo biloba, here's all the nootropics, without really asking, oh, well, what is why are you feeling no focus? Why are you all over the place? When it's as simple as like, okay, let's look at your Google Calendar. Like you just had a 9-to-5 job and you don't have that anymore. You don't have any structure. That's why you're feeling all over the place. So just like I say that to illustrate that it's coaching, and holistic health is literally everything in that person's life. Like nothing's off the table, and just weighing these different aspects of things to find the actual thing that's going to move the biggest rock and have the biggest ROI for them.
I think that's a huge factor. And I think I always say to the coaches that come within SMU is that our job is to be, if this was a Harry Potter movie, our job is to be Dumbledore. Your client is Harry. They're the hero of the story. You're working with them. Although that analogy was ruined because another mentor in the industry did the same thing, but said, "We are Q and your client is James Bond," which is way cooler than Harry Potter. But anyway, yeah. But I see this like coaches are really, even the women, coaches are really good at mansplaining. I have bad sleep. Try this problem. I have bad sleep. Melatonin. I have bad sleep. Carbs in the evening. I have bad sleep. Wind down time. And I'm like, why do you have bad sleep?
Yep.
You know, client won't. He's going out on the weekend and getting absolutely smashed every weekend. Oh well, don't just have vodka or don't drink. I'm like, but as he said, if you said, hey, what is it that makes you want to go out and have a beer? Well, I feel it's the only time to connect with people. It's the only time to have a wind down. Your solutions to kind of help that problem are so different from somebody who has an emotional connection to alcohol or feel they're forced to, who have business dinners. And the more we can ask, we can maybe unpack some of that fear of certain things by just asking better questions.
100%. That's like, to me, that's the good coaches ask really good questions. And I've actually gone through this as well. Like when I was first starting, like I was the guy who's like, oh, sleep, like let me roll off all the stuff that I've learned about sleep and see if that helps. But in reality, that's not really helping them to the best degree. It's literally like taking all the information they're getting them. There's a little bit of intuition that comes in with this as well, because just from like experience and just being capped in, to then asking the right question that they actually need to hear, that they actually need to do some reflection.
So going back to the toxin thing, what are the easy wins that people can do to manage their toxic load without it taking over their life?
Yeah, so plastics is a massive one. I feel like this is actually getting easier and easier to get rid of, because, you know, as like I was talking about the 67-year-old, and as we've gotten to this place where it's just everywhere, I feel like we're kind of hitting a place now where we know that all this stuff is not the best. And so new solutions are coming out, like technology is evolving and we're getting better solutions. So like probably 20 years ago, Tupperware was only plastic, but now we've got glass Tupperware, which is fucking phenomenal. And glass is essentially like replacing as much plastic as you can with glass. So like drinking out, I reuse my, like, this is a sauce container, and I just like clean it out and use it for water. So yeah, cups like that, Tupperware, that's the main thing, especially if you're putting it in the microwave like a lot of bodybuilders do. Every time I see that, I kind of cringe. Just replacing it with glass, like it's a simple solution. It might cost a little bit more money, but in the long run, if we're talking about health, it's probably going to pay you back in terms of your health and longevity. So plastics is a major one. And this isn't like go through your house, find everything that's plastic and throw it out. It's phased. So like maybe you see that you're still using plastic Tupperware. Okay, do some research on an affordable glass replacement, and then do that this week or this month. And then next month, maybe look at a different area of plastic that you're using. Maybe it's plastic cups, and start to like get sauce and like reuse those containers to have more glass that you can use. So you're slowly stopping to use all that plastic. And then another one that is kind of under the radar is like our clothing. So polyester is essentially plastic. And so the biggest organ in our body essentially is our skin. Our skin absorbs stuff pretty well. So polyester clothing, opting for natural fibers. Like I say this and I'm wearing a jersey, which is definitely polyester. So that's that balance, right? Like I really like this shirt, and so I wanted to wear it. I'm not too like fucked about, oh, it's polyester, it's going to ruin my life. It's the small things. More often than not, there's a bug right here. More often than not, I'm wearing cotton. And something that I've been doing recently is, and very important for testosterone and fertility and stuff like that, is polyester underwear. So this is actually a big one. Polyester underwear is pretty much categorized as a contraceptive, which means it's essentially birth control in men. So that can be a big rock to move, especially in terms of fertility. Like if your fertility and health are drastically linked. So if your fertility is impaired, there's going to be some health handbrakes going on. So this is a really big one, to just get plastic off of your testicles, because that plastic is getting in there. If you think about like you're working out, you're sweating, it's hot, it's kind of transferring into the testicles. So opting for 100% organic cotton boxer briefs. Again, a little bit more expensive. I didn't go out and buy 20 at one time. I bought 2, then I bought 2 more. Then luckily, like, I'm friends with the brand owner, so he sent me some free ones. So now I think I have maybe 10. So it's a slow phased approach, but now I'm completely off of polyester underwear. And so that was probably like a 3-4 month phase that I think is a much better approach in terms of like getting plastic out of your life.
Yeah. What about our water?
Water. Yeah. I always miss water because I feel like most people understand this, like drinking tap water, you just should not be doing that. Just like all the chemicals. I don't know about the UK, but in the US, there's a website. You can literally type in your zip code. Do you know what zip code is?
Yes, postcode.
Postcode. Yeah. And it essentially analyzes your local tap water and it spits back all the chemicals that are in it. And the amount of stuff that's like 100 times the limit, 50 times the limit, like gnarly chemicals that you're like, what the hell is that? 50 times the safety limit. And you're like, I'm literally drinking that. And I know that I am because that's my zip code. So getting a filter or just drinking spring water. So I get spring water delivered to me. Again, like in the idea of balance, like it is delivered in plastic containers, but it's harder plastic, so it's a little bit better, but the quality of water is just like leaps and bounds above tap water. And just like a Brita filter or like a fridge filter, like those will help. Yes, those will help get rid of some of the chemicals, but there's still a lot in there. They don't filter out the fluoride, which is a neurotoxin. We don't really want too high levels of that, which that kind of can be controversial. But again, like with the trend of things, I think more and more people are understanding that is true and they shouldn't be drinking that on a consistent basis.
It sort of coincides with the rise of worry about global warming anyway. You mentioned at the start with what your previous career is, that I think those two things are going hand in hand, that the removal of plastics, even if people don't buy into it from a health perspective, they might buy into it from an environmental perspective, and it has this sort of like double whammy effect on their health. And I think there's going to be people that listen to this that are going to be skeptical of the toxin thing, probably because, and I say this with no disrespect, they're going to believe everything that comes out of the mouth of Lane Norton. But and I do like Lane, right? But I think the thing that people almost need to be aware of, especially evidence-based coaches, which everything we should be doing should be based around the evidence, right? We met at Jake Carter's seminar. The amount of studies that were presented on those slides was astronomical, right? But to do a good study, you need to control everything. You need to control. If I want to see if that chemical or that toxin has an impact on humans, I need to control everything else to make sure we only know that thing. And what you don't see is, yes, X toxin might be safe, but that compared to that, with that, on top of that, on top of that, on top of the mold in your house, on top of the tap water, on top of the plastics, it's like stress, this allostatic load that we have. It's the load of toxins that are doing more harm than each individual one themselves. And if anyone says that toxins don't cause anyone any health issues, speak to someone who is a little bit older than you, who has a mouthful of mercury fillings, and see the problems that come out of that. Because I know I can't count on two hands the amount of people I know that are in their 40s that have lots of mercury fillings and have huge health implications because of it.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the things as well, like, yeah, you mentioned the allostatic load. It is a combination of all of these different factors. It's the convenience that that's just how we live our lives now. And that's why, I'm a big fan of the tiered approach. So you're not like eliminating everything at once. It's slowly but surely lowering the allostatic load. So then your health improves and your body gets even better at eliminating some of the other toxins. So it's kind of a double whammy in the sense of removing toxins allows your health to work better to then process and eliminate some of those toxins a little bit better. So if like all these toxins are in there and your liver health isn't quite where it needs to be, removing the toxins, working on health, it's kind of a exponential effect that's going to get you closer and closer to where you want to be.
So you mentioned seed oils as well earlier on. Where do you stand on the seed oil debate? Some people hate them, and Paul Saladino said they're going to make you explode, and again, Mr. Norton will say that they don't cause any issues whatsoever. Where do you fall?
Yeah. So I actually watched a really good video by Saladino. And I do like with any like Lane Norton and Saladino, you have to take into account their bias. So like Saladino is very biased towards seed oils, but he did create a very compelling argument. And it was similar to how Jake does. Like you actually look at all of the studies, how they are run, the exclusions, the controls, all of these things to really determine and understand, like, is this a study worth using and worth drawing conclusions from? And so what Saladino did is he essentially looked at all the research that Lane Norton talked about in his seed oil video, and using his higher standards of criteria for the studies, the studies that Lane used actually came to the opposite conclusion, that seed oils do create more harm. And then, and looking into a lot of those studies, I forget what the exact thing was, but essentially the seed oil group, in a lot of the studies, the seed oil group was given counseling on nutrition. So like they weren't, maybe they were exercising, or maybe they weren't having all these trans fats. That's what it was. The group that wasn't fed seed oils were having way more trans fats. And so we know trans fats are harmful. And so it's like, okay, you can make that conclusion. You look at the conclusion of the study, but then you have to look deeper into the study. How many people? What were the criteria? Like, what were the exclusion criteria? Like, talking about rabbit holes, we can go down a big one that Jake pointed out to me a while ago about vaccines. I think it was the DTaP vaccine, that they were running the experiment on fertility, on pregnant women, and they excluded all of the ones who had a spontaneous abortion. So it's like, how can you and then the conclusion was that there's no problem with it, but they excluded a large portion of the people that had the negative impact so that their study looks good. So like, and then it's right there, if you read the study exclusions, they excluded these people because of this reason, and you're like, oh, why is that? And then you can just chuck that study out because it's either biased, or they just don't know what they're doing, or who knows.
I think when you look at these things, and like I think Saladino gets a really, really hard rap. I don't agree with everything that Paul Saladino says. He obviously has a huge bias, but he's the Andrew Tate of the fitness industry, in the sense that people will judge him based off a 50-second reel in a supermarket with his shirt off saying broccoli is bullshit. And when you actually listen to him for an hour, he is, look, I'm not saying this is what you should do for you. I'm saying this is what happened to me. This is what it impacted. This is the studies that I have found that I think is going to impact me. Here is my blood work. And not only that, he's open to changing his mind, which a lot of people slammed him for not being carnivore anymore. And I'm like, right, you were moaning that he was carnivore 3 months ago. Now you're moaning that he's not. I'm like, this is progress. He's coming to a more well-rounded conclusion based off the research that he's doing, which is what we should all do as professionals. But where I fall in the seed oil debate is like, we're losing this in semantics and tribalism. It's this person says seed oils are not bad for you, and this person says seed oils are bad for you. And I was looking at a meta-analysis of 154 studies, and it was like, and the word was the dramatic increase in linoleic acid led to an increase in all-cause mortality, right? And increase of chronic health conditions. And people go, oh, that will say seed oil is bad. No, the words dramatic increase are the key words here, right? If you came to me, which I don't know where your hell is, I'm not going to ask, that's very personal, but like, I assume your testosterone in a good place, you're very lean, you're pretty healthy other than shoulder recovery, right? If you came to me, I'm not sitting there going to be analyzing the seed oils in your diet because you're metabolically healthy. But we've seen this sharp increase of seed oils being used in all sorts of things, and then the increase in trans fats, that pro-inflammatory fats aren't a bad thing. I say to my students all the time, if you didn't have anything that was inflammatory, nothing would ruin a fat loss transformation like cutting your finger and you couldn't clot. Bleeding out and dying on the floor really ruins a transformation. But it's the ratio that's become skewed now, particularly in the Western world. So if we can move away from this bad versus good and go, who do we have in front of us? Metabolically unhealthy Steve with a beer gut, who's living in a house full of mold, a mouth full of mercury fillings, super stressed out, barely sleeps, almost boozing every weekend, and hasn't looked at a fish in 20 years and only eats Tesco sandwiches, versus a coach and a trainer that lives on a Mediterranean beach. The conversation at seed oils is very different depending on these two people. Would you agree with that, or am I missing something?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. Like I'm the line that I take is like, my dogma is that I have no dogma, because I look at every person as an individual. Like, yes, we can have these great studies that tell us over large populations what is good and bad, but there's always an element of like n equals 1, which is the yourself study. And there's bioindividuality, there's genetics, like how us as humans, we're so different. We've had such different experiences, we've had like such different genetics and everything. So I think that also needs to be taken into account, like our thoughts and beliefs, all these things. Going back to the holistic health conversation, we really have to take into account all these things to then, just look at the person across from us. Is, coming back to seed oils, is seed oils this person's main problem? And if it is, then we can address it. If it's not, then maybe we're addressing other things. And then, also for like the difference in like someone is generally healthy versus someone who's extremely unhealthy and their ratio is just extremely off. Like, that's going to be a big rock to move for them, to remove the seed oils and get them a little bit less inflammatory. So I completely agree with that. It's all about looking at the person across from you and understanding what they need and what's going to be the biggest thing that's going to help them move in the right direction.
So if someone's listening to this now and they're having the similar symptoms that you experienced, and they don't know whether it's going to be testosterone or whether it's just something in their own private life and personal life. As you said, doctors won't necessarily test for these things as much as they should, and they might get just put on an SSRI. So if I was someone now that was going into my doctor and was going to ask for tests and blood work to be done, what tests should I be looking for? Because you're going to just get total testosterone. So what should they know, not only about what test they should run, but also, and I think this is probably even more important, I can say this from first-hand experience, what should they know before going through a blood test in terms of time of day, what they should do prior to the test to make sure they get an accurate reading so they know where they're at?
Yeah, so that was 2 questions. I'll go with the first one, like what tests to actually get. And then I'll go even before that. This is what I've learned. If you are just going to your doctor and they're being stingy with the test, like just tell them that you have ED, and then they're going to be a lot more open to giving you a testosterone test. That's a little hack, because they I guess they see that they can prescribe you a different medication possibly. But that's a quick hack. And then the test that you want to get. So like, total testosterone is very important, but you also want to look at other markers, free testosterone being a really important one as well, because that's essentially what our body can use. A lot of testosterone is bound up by something called SHBG, which is sex hormone binding globulin, which allows it to transport around the body, but essentially renders it inactive. So we want to make sure what are our SHBG levels. So getting the SHBG test. A few others, prolactin is one that I see that is not given much of the time. And someone could have okay testosterone levels, but their prolactin is sky high and they're dealing with brain fog. They're dealing with lack of drive and motivation. And they're like, oh, my testosterone's fine, but they don't really have the full picture. So prolactin is going to be really important to get. Estrogen is one as well, to get that estradiol. So you're just getting a much better picture. And then I like to get luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone as well, which are essentially the messengers that tell our body to produce testosterone or sperm. So having those in the picture gives us an insight to like how the whole process is working, and like, is it the brain? Is it the testicles? Is it something else? So all of those markers are the ones to get, because they give you a full picture. And then even on top of that, like, yes, that's just the hormone side of things. You still need to go a little bit deeper, because that's just the hormone picture. And the hormones are pretty downstream of just health in general. So like, let's take nutrient deficiencies for an example. Low testosterone, if you just look at that, you might not be certain if, what your zinc status is like. So there's a marker called ALP, which is pretty good marker to give you insight into if you have a zinc deficiency or not. So if you do that and your ALP is fine, then that can rule out a zinc deficiency. And then now it's not zinc, it's maybe something else. And then we look at vitamin D and your vitamin D is so low, then that gives us insight and we can support that. So I say all that. The way I look at hormones and the way I do everything is, again, we're looking at the whole picture. We're looking at not just hormones. We're looking at the metabolic panel. We're looking at CBC. We're looking at all of the markers that you would get, 53 plus markers that I use for my clients to really just get the whole picture. And then from that, you can start to see patterns and you have a much better understanding of what's actually going on. So you can address the right things to then get better results. That was the first part. What was the second part? Remind me that again.
So what do people need to know pre-test to make sure they're getting a genuine positive or negative?
Yes. So there's a lot of quality control that needs to be done with blood work. And this is done because the functional ranges are based off of research, and a lot of this research, and they have these controls in place. So like you hear you need to be fasted because those ranges that I have that we use are based on fasted blood work. So if you're unfasted, it's like comparing apples to oranges. It's just different. It just throws the data out. You can't use it. So that's why we have to have these quality controls. So it's fasted, decently hydrated, so like a liter leading up to the test. You don't want to train vigorously within 48 hours, sometimes 72 hours, because that can falsely elevate some markers. It can make you look more dehydrated. Creatine kinase can go super high. ALP, AST, ALT can all elevate because you're training and you have DOMs. Those are the main ones. And then also specifically for testosterone, you want to make sure that you're getting your test fairly early on in the day, because as a diurnal pattern, it peaks around, depending on when you wake up and your rhythm, but around 8 a.m. in general. And then it starts to fall as the day goes on. So making sure that you're getting it in the morning. And then also when you do blood tests in the morning, you have a lot less factors. You have a lot more control over everything that's going on. Same thing, like your audience will get this. It's why we weigh ourselves first thing in the morning, because we've had 9 hours of not consuming anything. And so that's a really good control that we have in place. So the same thing for this. You could eat a food that is inflammatory for you, and so it throws things off, or like you have a crazy response in blood sugar to this one thing and it just throws off your whole blood work. But then also it's all about the same thing with the scale. Like you want to weigh yourself at the same time every day. So if you get a testosterone test at 8 a.m. this one time, and then the next time you do it, you're at noon, and you're like, what the fuck? I went down, I was doing all this stuff. It's, again, you can't really compare those. You want to be as close as possible because it's all about the consistency. You want to make sure that everything that you did the first time is the same that you did the second time, so you can really compare the tests.
And I have personal experience of this. I did a test a number of years ago where I sort of knew what was going on because I had done a little bit of research on this stuff, but not to anywhere near to the extent that I have now. And the only time available for our blood work in this clinic in Hong Kong, first year I was there, was about 4 p.m. And I was like, oh my God, my testosterone's to the floor. What on earth has happened? I felt good. I was training hard. I was, and then I went to a functional nutrition doctor, which I worked with a little bit in Hong Kong, got tests done in the morning. And I went from way below the range to high normal. And I was like, the change is dramatic. But you mentioned there of sort of like functional ranges. And this is the interesting thing, right? Because a lot of the range you'll see, a doctor will prescribe you, this is the range, you are not dying. And that's basically what it tells you, right? You're not about to die. And they're based on averages. And if, as you said earlier on, declining 1% per year, these averages are going to go with them. So like when it comes to whether it's just testosterone or whether you want to throw in some other markers you think are important in there as well, what are the optimal ranges? What someone should be looking for if they feel all these symptoms, they go and get blood tests, the doctor just tells them they're fine, and they still feel like shit?
Yeah. So the ranges for testosterone, again, it's hard for me to convert. I know the nanograms per deciliter, which is the US measurement. I'll just use that, and then you can convert. So you'll go, the normal ranges are anywhere from, let's say, 250 to over 800, 900. But that all is characterized as normal. So like someone can come in 250 and they're struggling, they're feeling all these symptoms, but you're above 200, so you're still classified as normal. So you're not going to get the support. It's not considered a problem. And then you look at the guy he comes in and he's 800, but he is not having the issues because his testosterone is on the higher end. But yet they're still both plugged into the same bucket of normal, despite their experience being completely different. So like that kind of blows my mind that they're just looking at if you fall in the range, if you do, you're good. No matter what you're experiencing, no matter what symptoms you might be dealing with, they just kind of brush you under the rug of like you're within the normal ranges. But then also the normal ranges have been going down year after year after year. The normal ranges used to be, the upper limit used to be around 1200. So like it's slowly coming down to keep up with our decline. So it's like this kind of fake normal, because if we look back in the past, we were way higher. So then a lot more people, so like back then, let's say 400 to 1200. So like way more people are out of that range if we're using the normal ranges from years ago. So we're just kind of like keeping up with the decline by every year or so. We're lowering the ranges, or every decade or however often they'll do it, but consistently lowering the ranges so more people kind of fall into this normal, despite that lower, even like 400, 500 is just, you're still going to experiencing these symptoms and you're just not going to feel good.
So you mentioned obviously like hormones in your view is a little bit further down the totem pole in terms of the priority list. Now, this might be important for some of your clients who are clued up on this to go into, but I have a lot of coaches that will listen to this that will find things like functional health incredibly confusing. There's so many different hormone pathways. There's so many different places to start. Are we going to look at the thyroid? Are we going to look at the gut? Are we going to look at cells? And every educational provider is going to tell you start with a different thing. Everything starts with the gut. Everything starts with blood sugar. Everything starts with testosterone. Everything starts with the brain. So if someone is overwhelmed at this, of like where to actually start, how do you start to look at this tapestry of all these things going on and be able to start to put a plan together?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for me, and how I've learned, is essentially you want to look at the thing that is the biggest red flag. So like someone who, this is a good example. So someone who says everything starts in the gut, they might see one marker out, but we're starting in the gut because that's my dogma. When in reality, their liver enzymes could be sky high, but they're like, oh no, the liver enzymes are high because the gut. But like, that might be, but in the short term, and this comes with like client adherence and results, we talk about root cause approach. Sometimes you might want to put out a fire first to then be able to address the root cause. Because if you're trying to address the root cause, but there's a massive fire over here, they're not going to pay attention to this. This isn't going to really work because the adherence isn't going to be there. They're not going to be feeling better until maybe 3-4 months. So if we could dampen the liver enzymes, address that first, then that gives us a little bit more buy-in. They trust us. And just from a coaching psychology perspective, they're going to be a lot more adherent to the rest of the protocol because like I was dealing with this issue. Mark told me to do these 2-3 things and then I feel way better. So like, I'm going to listen to the rest of what he says rather than the coach who's like, no, we have to do antimicrobials. And then they start to get a Herxheimer and they feel like shit. And they're like, this isn't working. And they still have the liver problem. So like, yeah, I think that's a pretty decent illustration of like how I work and how I've been taught. It's coaching. It's nothing is like the same. We go through this one path for every single person. It's very customizable because every different person is going to come with a different problem, and that problem is going to be a higher or lower priority depending on what's going on with the markers, and then also symptoms, and then the answers to the questions that you're asking them, and then also what they're not saying. So like this is the next level of coaching that you have to get to really be able to deliver like these world-class results.
The two things there I think you said that were absolutely like amazing were buy-in and what they're not saying. And this goes out to the wider realm of coaching for moving away from hormones, right? Like buy-in there's two approaches. There's millions of approaches to nutrition, but there's two starting points to nutrition that I often talk to some of the coaches about when they're trying to get big body composition results with clients. And that is either to start the high to low. So start with the smallest humanly possible deficit that you can, the old school bodybuilding approach, and slowly remove calories as you go. I think that works really well with intermediate people who train really hard, move a lot. If I said what your maintenance calories and you said 3,000, I gave you 2,600, it's probably going to be pretty accurate. You're used to tracking. All these things kind of fit into place. I don't want you to lose muscle. I don't want you to feel like crap. And I don't want you to lose training performance. But if I gave, Susan from Kentucky, who doesn't know what protein is, like 200 calorie deficit, and just here's your macros, off you go. She's probably going to eat 1,000 calories over without even being aware of it because you're not understanding oils and sauce or seasonings, and nuts are healthy, right? I had a guy that once said that he had 800 grams of protein in a meal. And I said, first off, I've never told you about 800 grams of protein in a day, let alone a meal. Secondly, it's the amount of protein in the chicken, not the weight of the chicken. And third, you've weighed the plate. So unless you're planning on eating that too.
Yeah.
So we've got these clients now that maybe they don't move very much to really justify more food. They'll grow muscle on anything because they're brand new to it. They're not training hard enough to really worry about it. And they've been eating 5,000 calories, but of things the size of a postage stamp. If you gave them 4,500 of nutrient-dense foods, they're probably going to impact their gut more negatively than having less food. And again, we at the event in Amsterdam, we saw these wide varieties of caloric starting points depending on where the client was starting. But another point on that low to high approach, starting low and working the calories up as people move more, train harder, get used to things, track better, you get that buy-in. I've seen coaches genuinely slam low carb diets because of their bias, going, "Oh, you lost weight on a low carb diet? That was all glycogen." Like, you've just destroyed that client's sense of achievement. They came in feeling really proud of themselves, and you told them they did nothing. If they lose a couple of kilos in the first week and they go, "My God, Mark's amazing," guess what's going to be easier? Any elimination diet protocol you might want to have, any photo shoot prep you might want to push people harder for, gets easier with that buy-in. And the same thing with what's not being said. If I had a penny for every time someone said my client's on 600 calories, but they're not losing weight, and have you got food photos? Nope, but they've told me they're on it. Okay, yeah. Right. We have a really easy conversation. Before we start looking at testosterone or cortisol or thyroid or anything else they have no symptoms for, let's address the elephant in the room.
Yeah, 100%. I always tell my clients it's the two words I use are optimal and sustainable. And it's always a sliding scale in between the two of them. And we're always trying to work towards optimal. And everyone's starting point is a little bit different. So again, if there's that beginner that is weighing the plate, they're pretty far on the sustainability because they can't handle the optimal yet because they're just not going to do it. They're not going to be able to execute it. And so you can have the most optimal program for someone. You'd be like, "Oh, I spent hours on this. It's amazing. They're going to get such great results," but they don't get results because they don't do it because it's too far out of reach for them. So it's really, again, everything we're talking about is like coming back to the individual and having the awareness to give that person what they need rather than maybe what you want them to do or need. And just really understanding what the person across from you needs. And then also rather not what they want or what they say they want, you give them what they need. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. So obviously, I know we've just said how personal and individual this is going to be, but almost going away from that a little bit, if they've got their test results back and they've done all the things you said about blood work and they've got the testosterone and it's showing low. We've mentioned potentially look at your toxin load, potentially look at the amount of seed oils you had. We've talked a little bit about stress. What are some of the other big heavy hitters that the big rocks to get in place first before we delve into some of the more nerdy stuff?
Yeah, definitely. So sleep, of course, sleep is definitely an obvious one. Even just one night of poor sleep can lower testosterone by around 20%. So if you get a poor night of sleep before the test, it can possibly be lowered just from that. So if you're chronically sleeping poorly, then that's going to have a massive, massive impact. So that's always the first thing that you have to look at. You have to look at the foundations, stress, like we talked about, making sure that that's in check. It's not overwhelming. giving them stress management practices as well, making sure that their sleep is dialed in. Another big one is gut health, right? So if someone's not digesting and assimilating nutrients properly, they're going to have nutrient deficiencies, and nutrient deficiencies create hormonal imbalances because you don't have the substrates, you don't have the right nutrients for the enzymatic reaction that creates the hormone in the downstream. So gut health is actually a massive one that I see more and more. People coming to me with bloating, with stool inconsistency, loose stools mainly, and that just shows me that they're not absorbing any nutrients. And then, of course, they're going to have low testosterone on the back end of that. Mm-hmm. Those are big ones. Nutrition, of course. So okay, we have to make sure if you're digesting and assimilating the nutrients, but are the nutrients even there in the first place? So making sure that your diet is on point.
Let's break down those two things. So if we look at starting off with the gut, and then we'll come on to nutritional considerations. Obviously, this depends on what the gut issue is. We can go into another 5-hour podcast on this.
yeah.
I think coming into some of sort of like the big heavy hitter things, what do you see most frequently with gut issues, and what can people do if they're experiencing some of these things?
Yeah. So one of the main ones that I see is actually low stomach acid. That's a massive one. And so what that does, it's essentially you're not able to really, it impacts everything, but for simplicity, let's say it impacts your ability to digest protein. And so if you're not getting adequate protein, there's going to be some deficiencies that come off the back end of that. And stomach acid is essentially, it's one of the first things that happens in the digestive process. There's a lot before, but let's say, if food hits your stomach and then digestive process, let's say it starts there. There's so many different reactions that happen after that if you have low stomach acid, they're not firing as well. Maybe you're producing less enzymes because the body's not getting the signal to produce or release that. Your bile is probably a little bit lower, which bile helps digest fats. So just from the low stomach acid, it creates this cascade of a bunch of different issues. And then another job of stomach acid is to sterilize the food that you eat and anything that comes in. So if it's low, there's a higher prevalence and chance of seeing things like SIBO, parasites, candida, getting past that because it's not acidic enough. So it doesn't fully get sterilized, and then it gets into your intestines. And then that's what creates more issues of like overgrowth, what people are talking about when they have parasites, SIBO, candida. It gets past that low stomach acid, and then it creates a little bit more issues in the intestines. So low stomach acid, it's a fairly basic one, but it has a lot of downstream effects. And so if you have like SIBO, parasites, if we go downstream even further, your hormones aren't going to be optimal if you have this going on in your gut.
So what could people do if they have low stomach acid? I'm assuming, I say I'm assuming, I'm playing the idiot here, but we're looking at someone with a little bit more GERD, heartburn, indigestion type symptoms, where they're normally going to be going to the antacids and trying to dampen that stomach acid even more. But is this the main symptom of someone with low stomach acid?
Yeah, that's definitely a big one. Heartburn, difficulty digesting food, specifically protein, bloating after meals, upper stomach bloating, things like that. But yeah, heartburn's definitely a big one. And yeah, like you said, a lot of times people get this wrong. They think it's because they have too much acid in their stomach, so they need to dampen it down, which you can get relief, but then you're consistently chronically lowering your stomach acid, and therefore the chance of SIBO parasites drastically increases because you're just chronically lowering it. You might get relief, but you're not addressing the root cause, and you're actually creating more issues. So, and to my understanding of why this happens, because your stomach acid is so low, your stomach starts to churn to help to digest the food that's in there. And then also you're not getting the signal for your sphincter at the top of your stomach to close. So it remains open. So your stomach's churning. And so the acid starts to gum up and you experience that heartburn. So sometimes when people are experiencing that heartburn and they drink apple cider vinegar, which is acidic, it can help that. And sometimes that actually makes the heartburn go away. For some people, maybe not. Again, it's dependent on what's actually going on in your situation. So that was a roundabout way, but what can you actually do about it? There's you have to first look into, what's the cause of the low stomach acid, right? We're always looking at the cause in this situation. So there's two routes you can go. We can look into H. pylori, which actually binds onto parietal cells, which essentially creates stomach acid. And so that's going to lower stomach acid, but it's also going to possibly create gastritis, which is stomach inflammation. So if we were to go in and just directly support acid, you might get that burning in the stomach. It actually might create more discomfort. So we have to understand, is it H. pylori, or is it simply nutrient deficiencies or stress? Or like if you're stressed and you're on the go and you're running, all the digestive processes aren't fully in tune yet because your focus is elsewhere. You're more sympathetic, you're fight or flight, you're stimulated. And so the process, you call it fight or flight or rest or digest. It's rest and digest for a reason. So if we're calm, parasympathetic, our digestion is going to be a lot better. So looking into all of that stuff, and then also looking into nutrient deficiencies. So zinc and B12 are extremely important for stomach acid. It's kind of a catch-22. You need zinc to create stomach acid, but you also need stomach acid to assimilate zinc.
Yeah.
So you can kind of get into this rough area. So definitely supporting those nutrient deficiencies while also supporting acid with like betaine, apple cider vinegar, stuff like that, to kind of get things back into a little bit more homeostasis. Then you can move forward onto the next problems if they're there.
Yeah. So I think that's really interesting. You bring up the stress stuff and fight or flight, and that's I know so many people that are and I won't go into it too much, but I got into a debate with someone that's really like head fast on gut being the issue, and there was a very personal connection to it with her, and that she ended up getting taking it very personally. But it's the way I always think about it is like if you if you imagine, like, I hate ancestor analogies, but they are the best for this. Like if you're getting chased by a tiger and you were having digestive upset at the same time, a probiotic isn't going to help you.
Yeah.
And it's things like, right, if we can calm the nervous system and get into rest and digest, what symptoms are still there? And if the symptoms are still there, right, now we've ticked the big thing that's going to affect all these downstream things down and go, right, what's still there? Right, let's look into that. So let's say someone's now looked at that, they've addressed the stomach acid, and we're now looking at nutrition considerations. Now, we obviously mentioned zinc and B vitamins being a very important thing here, which obviously I'm assuming is a big factor on the food, as well as just supplementation. But what else can people consider when it comes to nutrition as a whole?
Yeah, definitely. So there's kind of been, and probably in the world that you come from as well, and the people that you interact with, like this big focus on macronutrients.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important, but I think there needs to be a little bit more focus on the micronutrients. So, and how do you do this? It's not making the cheesecake that's packed with protein. It's actually it's eating whole foods. And to be fair, like I used to do that exact same thing. I used to make like protein cheesecakes back in the day, and I had gnarly gut issues. I used to eat way too much sucralose. I get plain Greek yogurt, and then I dump like literally a protein scoop of sucralose into the Greek yogurt and eat it. And I was like, oh, why do I have gut issues? I'm always bloating. Tangent, yeah, like
Welcome to Wells bodybuilders. We've all done it.
Yeah. But yeah, moving away from that, I did the plant sucralose, calorie free, I get massive amounts of protein, don't have to worry about the calories. That was the former focus. And now like focusing more on micronutrients. So whole foods, an array of different foods. So a perspective I like to use is essentially like look at the rainbow, and you want to get some orange foods, some red foods, some green foods, bunch of different colors, because different colors essentially means different nutrients. So orange is very heavily correlated with vitamin A, carrots, sweet potatoes, stuff like that is going to be really good with vitamin A. So if we're talking about a really basic person, like don't tell them like, yeah, you need more vitamin A, more vitamin B12, vitamin C. Tell them eat more orange foods. Tell them eat more red foods or whatever. Could be a little bit easier way to get them more adherent and just moving in the right direction.
Think science talk client. This is a huge thing. I see people go, remove 30 grams of carbs, like take the carbs out of dinner. Like take the potato out of dinner. Like get extra 2,000 steps. Go for a walk at lunchtime. Like you're thinking the data, you need something that you can track and see how they're doing with this, and something they can actually understand.
Yeah, 100%. I see this, and with marketing as well, like talking about from a marketing perspective, to even like get the clients in to have these conversations. If you're talking about like for biomechanics, the strength curve ratio on your content, like the people that are going to resonate with that are like probably other coaches or bodybuilders. But if your niche is like stay-at-home moms, like they don't give a fuck about that, nor do they really understand anything that you're talking about. They just want to lose 10 pounds and fit into a bathing suit. So what they need is not, they don't need that level of detail.
Yeah. And I think this goes both ways as well, right? Because there's going to be a few coaches of this that will generally go, and what we were kind of having a conversation with before we click record, of like there's a coach who go, oh well, I don't need to learn any of this stuff then. I don't need to learn any important stuff because the clients won't understand it. And I see this with nutrition, that people don't need to know hormones and things like this because it's all about calories. And I see this with training, that people go, I don't need to learn exercise mechanics because my clients are beginners. And I'm like, that's why you need to learn it. Manipulating a strength curve would mean that people will not panic at the bottom of the hole. It means they'll work harder with every inch of the rep. It means they'll be safer. It means you can work around their structure. You need to understand it. You just don't need to tell your client what you're doing. It's like the magic trick, right? Like we all know you knew the card that they were going to pick before they picked it. You don't need to tell them about the double lift and the false shuffle, right? You just need to show them the trick. And it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, that's good. I really like that analogy.
I need to remember that one. That is, talk about content. That is one. I need to use a magic trick one because down there I have a bunch of playing cards when I used to do that as a hobby. So moving on to like the next thing, when we talk about testosterone, people have watched the marketing ploy about testosterone will see that every year there's going to be a new supplement to boost testosterone, whether that's Tribulus or Tonka Ali. Is there any validity to any of this stuff? And where does supplements as a whole fall in your priority list? Are there any that pass through into what you would give you to your clients?
Yeah, definitely. So this is I talk about this a lot in content and just like in conversations that I have. There's to be short, like, yes, these T boosters can work, but there's a caveat there. And the caveat depends on one, do they actually need that? And two, supplement quality. So let's just take, we're talking about zinc. So let's keep on that thread. If a T booster, like zinc is characterized as a T booster, but it's only working if you are zinc deficient. If you're taking zinc and your zinc stores are already good, you're not going to get any testosterone boost. So throwing it in a product and taking that product thinking it's going to boost your test, it's not going to work because you're not getting what you need. There's research that shows in zinc deficient people, supplementing with zinc does increase testosterone, but is that you? We don't know unless we have your blood work, and then we can make a lot more educated decisions. So that's my whole stick on the supplements. Then the supplement quality. So I really don't like bad supplements. And a way that you can just see them very quickly is if they have a proprietary blend. So this is essentially, they just like label it as platinum testosterone boosting blend, 750 milligrams. And then beneath that, it has all the hype words. It has Tonkat, it has Fedosia, it has Tribulus, it has zinc, vitamin D, vitamin K. But you don't know, you don't know the quantities of that. It can literally be like for Tonkat, 200 milligrams would be a decent, 200 to 400 would be decent dose. They could put 1 milligram of Tonkat in that and still say it has Tonkat Ali, but you're not getting any benefits because the dose is insignificant. And then further below that, these studies that are done on these herbs, specifically Tonkat Ali, they're on the active ingredient, which is uricomanone. And so if the product is not standardized for that active ingredient, again, you're guessing. It's probably a lower quality product. It's probably not going to work because it doesn't have enough of the active ingredient for it to actually work. So that's what I see a lot. And that's why the natural test boosting approach gets a lot of shit, because there's so many of these products out there that are not standardized. They're using proprietary blends. People take them, they don't get results, and therefore they attribute that to the natural approach doesn't work. But in reality, they're just not one, taking a good product that has what actually works in it, or two, they're taking something that they don't actually need, and therefore they're just not going to get the benefit.
So, like, going into the coach's perspective here, we've talked a lot about various things about testosterone today, and we've kept coming back to finding out what the root cause is and getting the blood work, which I think is really, really important. But you've been studying blood work, what, since 2018, did you say? Like, starting to look at this?
2021 is when I joined
2021.
the.
So like three years of really in-depth study, and you have gone in depth because I know who your mentor is, and as we said before we came on the air, that man is Rain Man. So, you know, for most coaches, aren't going to be as skilled at reading blood work as potentially you are, right? So, it's maybe a double-edged question. At what level is it the coach's responsibility, do you think, to understand blood work? Do you think this is something that coaches should have within their scope of practice to really be a health professional? And my other side to that question is, at what point does someone refer out to a doctor or an endocrinologist when there's problems?
Yeah. So I think for the first one, it kind of depends on your scope. Like, what are you helping people with? And then also personally, like, are you in it to get really good results? Are you in it for the client's well-being, or are you just doing it to, like, work a remote job? Yeah, I guess to call yourself a health professional, I would say it's probably something that you need to know. Possibly if you're like still a fitness coach, then maybe not. And you could possibly just get into networks and you have like a consultant that does that. Like, I work in that capacity for some coaches, supplement company owners and stuff like that. They don't know, but they also want to get their clients better results. So then they, that's where I come in and I help in that aspect. But yeah, I think if you want to call yourself a health professional, especially in these days, especially moving forward, like if you don't understand bloods, then you're at a massive disadvantage, in my opinion.
I think at the very least you should understand symptoms. And this is the thing that I think I hammer into all my coaches. Like, blood work is complicated, and it's not going to be a quick fix. You're not going to be able to do a weekend seminar in Amsterdam and completely understand everything about blood work. There are notes that I need to go back still and go over and over and over and over and over again. But I think, especially if your goal is fat loss, and we haven't spoken about too much today, but the link between calories and testosterone. And one of the things I say is, like, cycling calories over the course of the year is probably one of the biggest health levers you could pull. This is one of my biggest gripes with Brian Johnson trying not to die, is he has to like inject himself with so much TRT to make up for the fact that he's in a 365-day calorie deficit. And what we see is, as I said earlier on, with the two health approaches, you have high to low, we have low to high. What we see too often in the industry is low to low to lower and stay. And if, at very least, even if you don't understand blood work, understand the things that Mark said at the start of this show. Depression, energy, libido, poor sleep. What are the signs that something is going wrong when you're pushing someone too hard? Because that is the sign that you need to take your foot off the pedal, right? And if you continue to see these symptoms, that's when either you need to upskill or you refer to a doctor, an endocrinologist, or a consultant like Mark to be able to kind of go, right, let's see what this problem is. I think at the would you agree, at the very base layer, all coaches should know enough about how the body works to understand symptoms that they're causing harm. Because like nurses and doctors, our jobs at the very least should be to do no harm.
Yeah, 100%. Like, that's the Hippocratic Oath, right? That's the first rule, do no harm. And sometimes you have to put your ego in the closet and be like, wow, I actually don't know how to help this person because of what's going on. Maybe they're not getting results. And then also possibly having knowledge of those symptoms of, like, they're experiencing all these things that I know are similar to low testosterone, but I don't actually know the best way to go about that. And yeah, then referring out, I think that's a good way to look at it. And then for me, like the second part of the question you asked me was, when do I refer out? And it's similar to, like, if I see bloods or if I see a condition that I don't feel comfortable with, that I don't have experience with, that no one in my network has experience with. See, like, I'm pretty lucky in the sense of I'm in the IOH, so then my network is vast and the array of conditions that I can speak to people about is ridiculous. And then I have weekly calls with Jake too. So I feel pretty comfortable with a lot of stuff that maybe I haven't worked with directly, but I have the foundational skills and then also the support on the back end to support me to be able to get this person exactly what they need. And I think that's really important to have that network and to have that the ability to possibly, if it is a condition that, you know, maybe it's a little bit too intense for me, and then I can refer out. I can refer out to someone within the institute or someone that I know that is really like that's their specialty.
Mm.
And then further things like, say someone comes to me and they seem fairly normal, but a lot of stuff on the blood work, like if their WBC is below 3.5, that's usually when markers like that, if some things are just like clearly out, like if ferritin is over 700, that's usually going to be like hemochromatosis. And therefore, like I can support them, but it's also, you want to be able to refer out to a GP to get them maybe more immediate help, or more just to get them with a doctor. Mm-hmm. Because like we talk shit about doctors all the time, but they're also really good at like saving people's lives. If some people are a little bit too far gone for us as health coaches, refer them out, get them back into the level of like where we can work, and then from there you take over, and then you get them back to better levels of health and optimal levels of health.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that answer. And I think there's one thing, like if I could change, and I know I just said it, but if I could change a term that I think would make more coaches refer when they have client struggles you don't understand, I would change it to refer to rather than refer out. Because refer out has this connotation that means I will no longer work with this client and I will then lose money, where then ego and selfishness comes way too much into this and people try to go with them this out the scope. Where if it's refer to, it's like, look, I'm still going to be working with you, but I'm going to be working alongside X, Y, and Z to make sure you get the help you need. Like, people think that might mean you lose a client. I think the opposite. Clients are going to be retained for longer when they go, my God, he's not trying to be the expert at everything. He's going to make sure I get the best help. And you now can have the faith that you're doing good by the client. So a couple of closing questions I have. And this is almost based on your sort of your buy-in sort of component here and the weighing up what is most important here. This is an old Andrew Huberman question that keeps getting asked on podcasts. I'm going to ask you is, do you feel you change the mind with the body or the body with the mind? What leads?
What leads? Gosh, I'm kind of in the middle. Like, I don't know if I could pick one. I don't know if that's copping out, but they're just so interwoven for me that you can change the mind by changing the body, and you can change the body by changing the mind. It's like, maybe we'll look at the individual. What do they like? What do you think for them would be easier? So possibly someone who has a lot of training experience, but they're just in a massive rut and they can't, like, they're just, health is not there. They know how to train. That's a little bit more familiar. So maybe for them, it's, we start with the body because they have much more experience with the body and not as much with the mind. So we get them in the gym. You know, nutrition is a little bit more dialed in. They start to get momentum. They start to feel better. And then we can swing back into the mind and maybe dive a little bit deeper into there, because it's not as much of a jump. Because again, it's looking at the individual, like, and understanding what's the best path for them to go down. I've never thought about that. That answer just came to me, but I think it's pretty awesome.
I agree. I thought it was an awesome answer. I don't think it was a cop out whatsoever. So the last question I always ask everyone that comes on the show, because I think especially younger coaches see people, whether it's they see you talking about this blood work and it just seems so advanced and so far ahead for them, or they see people that seem so put on a pedestal that they just think, my God, I just can't do this. And I always want to remind everybody that it's still idiots all the way up. I might know a little bit about anatomy and biomechanics, but outside of that, I'm a complete dumbass. So, like, what is one thing you have changed your mind on? This could be nutrition, blood work, training, nutrition, or it could just be general in life.
Is there a time frame?
In what sense?
In general? Like something I've changed my mind on in the last year, in the last 10 years?
Whatever springs to mind.
Yeah, okay. So kind of what I was talking about with the Greek yogurt and the Splenda, I was very, if it fits your macros, calories are the only thing that matters. And so I was super into that, but I just wasn't quite I wasn't getting the results that I really wanted to. So then I started to swing back into more quality food. And that's just a game changer for me. Like I was completely just calories in, calories out. That's it. Cheesecakes with tons of Splenda, protein powder. It's this amount of protein, carbs, and fats. It's in my macros. I'm good to go. If it's chemicals or if it's not necessarily the best food, I'll burn it off in my workout and it doesn't matter. So that's how I used to think. And I completely changed my mind on that. I'm much more focused on the details, focused on the quality of food, focusing on the ingredients, how it makes me feel, all of this stuff. So that was a massive shift in terms of what I was focusing on.
I think that's a huge answer, but especially because like people normalize how they feel right now. So they go, "How do you feel?" "I feel great. I feel fine," because they've normalized how poor they feel. One of the first books I ever read in the functional health space was by a guy called Sean Croxton. I don't know if you ever remember who that guy was. He now does money and business side of stuff, but he used to run a YouTube channel and podcast called The Underground Wellness Show. I'm showing my age here. Like one of the original YouTube shows when it was still really grainy footage and stuff like this.
Yeah.
But he was really ahead of his game, and he wrote this book, which annoyingly isn't sold anymore because he's moved so far away from it, but called The Dark Side of Fat Loss, which talked about all these, like, he had a great way of explaining really complex stuff in really good analogies and easy to understand ways. And I still go back and read it regularly, even to this day. But what he often got people to do, he had these t-shirts called Just Eat Real Food. It was just Jerf across the front of a t-shirt. And what he did is he got people to do these things for 30 days. And then at day 31, he told them to do whatever they want. And going back to this buy-in point, obviously, and again, this is not always a good thing. And if you start looking at, if someone has a big gut issue and you finally got them off a certain food and you add it back in, you started the clock again. But what that thing he did was like, by day 31, they were like, "Oh my God, is that how terrible I used to feel?" And all of a sudden, this switch of like food quality became such an important thing to their life, because before, when they were just thinking of calories in versus calories out, they didn't realize they could feel better. They thought this is what you just needed to do. So I think that's a really huge point that people take for granted because they only think about body composition. They don't think of the health implications of this. And they don't think of, well, I might lose fat now, but if I keep doing this only calories in versus calories approach for 20 years, am I still going to be able to achieve the body composition I did at 25? Almost certainly no.
Yeah, I think that was me, and that's exactly how I was living my life. But I think it's cool. It's changing, and I think Jake shared this in the seminar that we were at, the Google Trends. So looking into the search of like fitness or body composition or the more like body composition focused Google searches, and then health and holistic health, and those are just like massively peaking and even above like things like fitness or bodybuilding. So I think, and also with 2020 as well, I think like more people are waking up to this and understanding that it is more granular than just calories in, calories out. There's the chemicals like we talked about, there's micronutrients, there's all this stuff that people are starting to focus on and take serious. And I think it's a trend that I'm here for.
This is the thing we spoke about before we clicked record, right? I think the pandemic really opened people's eyes to health more so than body composition. And whether you like or dislike the guests that were on the Diver CEO, some of them I think are deluded, and some of them I think are a bit harshly criticized, and but what does that show? If we have people, we aren't saying how to. I haven't seen a Diver CEO episode going best way to grow your biceps. I haven't say best way to. I've seen a few fat loss ones, but other than that, it's the scary truth about blood sugar, or this is impacting your testosterone, or stress management. It all health related things. The rise of Brian Johnson trying to live to 6 million, love him or hate him, that he wouldn't have risen 15 years ago. And I quite like a lot of what Brian says, but that wouldn't have happened 15 years ago when it was just a body composition focused world. There is this movement. And I think for yourself, for the rest of the guys on the IOH, for any coach that's sort of leaning into maybe listen to this, it's sort of like, I need to get on the health bandwagon. I think it's only going to serve both your clients, you, and your business in the long run. So for people who want to learn more about you and the work you do for testosterone, maybe even hire you as a consultant, as from a coach, or clients that may just want to improve their own testosterone, where are people finding you?
Yeah, Instagram is my main hub, it's my name, Mark Holman, and then health after that. So Mark Holman Health. That's where I hang out for the most part, post all my content, and yeah, that's the easiest place.
Mate, this has been an absolute pleasure. I've really, really enjoyed connecting again after Amsterdam. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, of course, man. Had a blast.